Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this ANH session. My name is Claudia Offner. I will be the technical manager for the session on best practices for social behavior change in nutrition-sensitive agriculture, chaired by Amy Gerard. Thank you for taking part in this ANH 2022, and we look forward to a robust and interactive session today. A quick reminder to everyone that everything you might need to access for the conference materials and program can be found on our ANH Academy website. Thank you so much for coming, and over to you, Amy.
All right, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to our side session on best practices for social behavior change in nutrition-sensitive ag. We really appreciate you joining us. We know there are a lot of different options, amazing sessions for folks to choose from, and we're honored that you chose to be with us for the next 60 minutes. So while you're introducing yourselves in the chat, I'll go ahead and introduce our team here today. So my name is Amy Gerard. I'm an associate professor in global health at Emory University. I'm joined by Lynette Golding, who serves as the social and behavior change advisor for gender equality and the social inclusion lead at Save the Children. Mary Packard, an anthropologist, an independent consultant and expert in social behavior change, especially for nutrition, and Sidinia Tewodros, a public health program associate at Emory, who has been working in nutrition-sensitive ag and social behavior change as well. Collectively, our team has more than 40 years of experience in the design, implementation, and evaluation of social and behavior change interventions, multiple arenas for nutrition, ag, gender, maternal and child health, and also HIV. So I'm going to kind of briefly go through our background and purpose and then introduce our session agenda. Before we kind of dive into the best practices, I would like to provide you with a bit of background about why this side session on best practices. Our team was funded by the Gates Foundation a few years ago to conduct a global landscaping of nutrition social behavior change in the context of nutrition-sensitive ag programming. The goal of this landscaping analysis is to provide practitioners, donors, and researchers with usable guidance related to successes, gaps, and challenges for social behavior change in the context of nutrition-sensitive ag, and how to best support effective social behavior change to improve diets. Our landscaping is descriptive in nature. It's not evaluative. So we're primarily focused on the what and how of nutrition SBC design, implementation, and monitoring. However, we and our donor are also interested in how the sort of current state of nutrition social behavior change in nutrition-sensitive ag aligns with best practice. But to achieve that goal, we needed to identify a set of best practices that could serve as a benchmark for our analysis. And so to do that, to develop an initial list of best practices, we took several core steps. We surveyed the literature both systematically and non-systematically, reviewing peer-reviewed and gray literature documents and reports and manuscripts, program evaluations, social behavior change strategies, program guidance documents. We also reviewed recent prominent resources by leaders in the field of social behavior change. So for example, CCP, C-Change, Breakthrough, Behavior Change Wheel. We pulled on our own as well as others' experiences with implementing social behavior change, both in nutrition-specific and nutrition-sensitive interventions. And much of the literature that we've identified, while it did focus more generally on social behavior change across multiple arenas, we really tried to hone in and focus on literature that had very relevant applications for nutrition and nutrition-sensitive ag, including some of the more recently developed how-to guidance that's been done by ANH, by USAID, and by CORE. So our purpose today is to recognize that there are multiple how-to guidance documents out there for practitioners. And so to bring all of that together in one place and identify and discuss those practices that have risen to the level of consensus based on documented experience. And so what we hope to do today is present this preliminary framework of nutrition, social behavior change best practices, particularly as it's related to nutrition-sensitive ag. And we would like to understand if they resonate with you as practitioners and researchers, and whether you know any gaps or areas in need of refinement. So this session is not a how to do SBC, for example, but rather a sounding board session and an opportunity for you all to contribute your experiences, your expertise, and your perspectives in shaping these best practices. So our agenda today is going to look something like this. Lynette and Mary are going to spend about 25 minutes providing background on the best practices and overarching core principles that we've discovered through our review process. And throughout that portion of this session, we would like for you to share your thoughts, your perspectives, your recommendations, any gaps that you see via the chat function so that we can document your feedback. So Denny and I will be monitoring the chat during this time and collecting that information. We'll then spend about 5 minutes after Lynette and Mary have finished to discuss some of the key themes that you all have raised and maybe take some clarifying questions. We'll then move into a sort of a self-assessment activity. This may be challenging because we may not be able to use the annotate function that we had originally planned to, but we'll try to make it work. But we will essentially spend about 15 minutes asking you all to estimate the extent to which your organization or the organizations that you work with meet the different core concepts and best practices. During that time, we will also ask you to share program experiences and perhaps some examples of how your organization has implemented a best practice particularly well. We'll then have some concluding remarks and identify some next steps. So before I turn this over to Lynette, I would first like to orient you all to the draft conceptual framework in its entirety. Don't be overwhelmed because we're going to run through each portion. And as a reminder, this is still a working model, and we do hope to further refine it based on your inputs today. The center of the framework represents the systematic process with 5 key steps for designing, implementing, and evaluating nutrition social behavior change. We've also identified 4 core principles that underlie the process, as well as 10 critical best practices that relate to different stages in the systematic process. The elements that we have included in this conceptual framework reflect consensus across the range of sources and resources that we reviewed on what tends to be associated with quality implementation and recommended to achieve more successful, more effective outcomes. What I really just want to kind of draw your attention to are the 3 main parts of this framework. So the brown circles capture the steps in the systematic process, which Lynette is going to introduce to us. The black text are the best practices within that systematic process that align with different phases, though in some cases they may cut across multiple. And then the 4 green banners are the core principles that underlie or sort of cut across the entire process itself and the best practices. So I'll now turn it over to Lynette to walk us through the steps in the systematic process, the brown circles, and the 4 core principles, the green banners.
Thanks to all of you for joining us today. Hopefully you won't hear too much background noise. I'm in a conference center, so my apologies. And if it gets too loud, I can always hand it back over to Amy. But just to start us off, since the development of the P process by Johns Hopkins University Center for Communication Programs in 1982, a basic 5-step process has been adopted, adapted, and promoted by various organizations in guidance documents. Now there are different models to capture the same essential steps of this time-tested process. So I'm not going to go into all the details on the steps here because I think you're probably all pretty familiar with them, and the best practices we discuss later will help illustrate as well. But just to summarize, the first step is engaging stakeholders to define the key problem the initiative will address and prioritize the behavior change objectives to focus on. And that will help you shape your research questions as you study the context and issues affecting those behaviors. And results from your research will then inform the selection and design of specific activities and materials to be used in the SBC initiative, as well as to establish the indicators you're going to need for the M&E plan, the monitoring and evaluation plan. Then it's a matter of really implementing and monitoring progress along the way, and eventually evaluating the outcomes. So learning and adaptation, are key. And we like this graphic because while it captures the 5 main steps in the SBC process, it also reminds us that it's not a linear process. So the 2-way arrows in our framework have the added value of showing that iterations don't just repeat the full cycle. Instead, there can be a back and forth dynamics between all the steps. And this reflects the more recent emphasis on program learning and adaptation, which supports continual improvement. And while these dynamics are integrated into the process, we shouldn't really worry that it becomes, willy-nilly. The process is still systematic since it's based on a methodological rationale. So now we're just going to focus on the 4 core principles, and then I'll hand it over to Mary. So you can kind of think of and I'm talking about the text in the green bars here. And we can think of these as overarching or cross-cutting elements that form a foundation for developing and implementing quality SBC initiatives. And they apply to all of our best practices. And as we go through each core principle and best practice, please feel free to share your thoughts or your comments, your recommendations in the chat box. You might not be able to go through all of them in our short session today, but we will use all of them and consider all your suggestions to help us further refine our paper. So let's start. The first core principle is about being systematic. And this means being strategic, logical, and explicit about our method. Now, it might sound simple to say we must be systematic in our SBC process, but in practice, many SBC projects are implemented without having an SBC strategy. And I don't know if you've ever seen a project that implements activities without a clear rationale spelled out for why they are selected. I have. And have you ever seen staff be confused because they don't know how certain key messages relate to the formative research? Or, have you seen a project that wastes resources because they try to do too much without any kind of focus? If so, then you probably know that this intervention that you're looking at, it's not grounded in a systematic approach. So the SBC strategy document is both the sign of being systematic and a guide to ensure implementation is systematic. And the strategy should really articulate the rationale for each element of the initiative and how those elements relate to each other, which will guide the development of all the SBC tools and activities and the monitoring and evaluation plan as well. And the SBC strategy really helps ensure that implementers invest project resources in alignment with priorities and donor expectations. And it guides staff and partners to plan and implement activities that will maximize the uptake of targeted behaviors among targeted groups. Now I'm talking about the bar on the bottom and the evidence-based bar. Now, research consistently shows that evidence-based SBC programs can increase knowledge, shift attitudes and norms, and produce changes in a wide variety of behaviors. Evidence-based interventions have been proven effective, well, to some degree, through outcome evaluations. However, it should be noted that retrospectively knowing what worked in a particular program, and that's the objective of an outcome evaluation, it does not reliably answer the question of what works in general and what will work in future programs. Evidence-based interventions are validated for a specific purpose and with a specific population. And as you can imagine, there are many ways to change an intervention for the materials that you use, the audience, the context, on and on. And all these things can really alter the effectiveness of an intervention. All that said, knowing the evidence behind an intervention is a nice place to start. So theory informed. Now, there's a growing recognition that attempts to change behavior really should be based on theory. And there's a wide range of theories incorporating social and cultural and economic factors that influence behavior. A theory is a set of concepts or statements that specify how phenomena relate to each other. And theories and models can help explain or predict behavior, as well as provide a basis for planning, implementation, and evaluation. No single theory dominates social and behavior change, and nor should it. The problems, the behaviors, the populations, cultures, and the context of public health practice are broad and varied. And so your theories should be as well. Some theories focus on individuals as the unit of change, and other theories examine change within families or institutions or communities or cultures. Adequately addressing an issue may require more than one theory, and no one theory is suitable for all cases. And lastly, we have community engagement and being very participatory. And really, this principle has two dimensions. It refers to our need to engage community members in every step of the process, from defining the problem to designing solutions and evaluating results. It also refers to the techniques we use in implementation of specific activities, that they should always be interactive and engage people's active participation. We often remind staff and frontline workers that we should listen more and talk less, that people need to be in the driver's seat. They need to be driving the activities, not us. But we also like to remind folks that people won't remember much and certainly won't change their behavior just because we told them to, right? Well, it's not always so easy to ensure that activities are run in a way that really prioritizes community members' active participation. But we do know that the more actively engaged people are, the better things work. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mary, and she's going to take us through the best practices.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Lynette and Amy and everybody for being here. I'm gonna, go through the best practices parts of our model and start with this one. You've seen this framework that Amy presented. It shows the model with the 5 steps and the best practices floating around in the black text. And they're not really meant to be strictly aligned with the steps, because they might apply in different phases of the process, but we've associated them with those steps. And I'm going to go through them one by one so we can go to the next and just talk about each of the best practices. So the first best practice relates to target behaviors. We can't really expect to change behaviors or measure change if we haven't specified, what exactly those behaviors are that we want to target. So we base the identification of specific behaviors we choose on the evidence. That means that target behaviors must be relevant to both the focal issue and relevant to the local population. It's usually pretty easy to identify behaviors we want to change, right? But it's a lot harder to prioritize. We like to remember one of our favorite SBC slogans, less is more. So if we want to have sustainable impact, SBC interventions really need to avoid trying to do too much. So I'm sure you've seen projects that have a really long list of target behaviors. Just think about what happens with that. I've seen staff become confused about what to focus on, seen the impact of interventions be diminished because they're so diluted in their efforts. So we know that programs can struggle to prioritize, but there are tools available that can help teams through the process of selecting priority behaviors based on what research shows will be both impactful and feasible. So just to take a little example, imagine a program that wants to improve diets for young children by boosting protein consumption. They might note the high impact of eating more animal source foods, but if the research shows the target population can't realistically access flesh foods, but they do have plenty of ground nuts available, the project could then prioritize the key behavior of adding ground nuts to the child's porridge. The project might also want to improve dietary diversity with key behaviors of planting fruit trees to eat more fruit, but then they may discover that the relatively low nutritional impact of eating fruits and the relatively higher difficulty involved with fruit trees might lead them to prioritize, just focus on adding the ground nuts to the diet instead of investing in the fruit tree promotion. So we'll go to I'm going to go through all of these kind of as efficiently as I can, and then we'll discuss. So the next best practice is related to the principle of being evidence-based, which Lynette discussed, and it serves as really a foundation for all the other best practices. The success of any intervention is going to depend to a large extent on how well it's tailored to the local context and people, and responsive to the range of forces that influence behavior, including people's values and social networks. So that tailoring requires we do research to gain an understanding of those factors. A variety of methods can be useful in SBC research, and the research plan should be strategically designed to fit a program's budget and make best use of the resources they have. For example, a good desk review can provide a grounding in global evidence and relevant project experience, and can help uncover insights on culture and social norms. And especially if they include anthropological literature from the project area, they can really help us streamline the design of formative research to be more targeted and cost effective. So here, many of you have seen, I think you can click Sedenia to show this socio-ecological model that many of you might have seen different versions of. There's a wide body of literature that has, and experience, that's shown the value of this model. It highlights that individuals always situated in a broader social context, and that it's important that interventions address the multiple levels in the social system that affect behavior and the different factors that operate across them. Those layers of influence go from family and friends to community level groups and leaders to the broader enabling environment that includes laws, economic structures, cultural systems. So for example, we know that if an intervention only targets an individual mother, even if her attitude and her skills do change, she might not be able to improve her child feeding practices because of influence of, for example, a mother-in-law or the social norms around her. So if we identify and focus on the relevant parts of the interrelated system, we can increase the potential for meaningful change. With nutrition sensitive ag programs, we tend to work almost by definition at multiple levels, and as we target individual behaviors and the agricultural system around it. So while the last practice was really about targeting multiple levels and groups, this one is talking about using multiple approaches. SBC research and experience has shown that when we use a mix of methods, it's going to be more effective. When we combine different approaches in one initiative, it allows us to tailor the methods to fit the different groups, their preferences and inclinations, and to address the multiple behavioral determinants that we identify. It also helps us, if we combine methods, to reinforce key messages in different ways. And we know that repetition helps things stick, whether it's new information or new skills. An example of this best practice could be a project promoting orange flesh sweet potatoes. It may work through a farmer's co-op to introduce new techniques for growing, and also at the same time do cooking and feeding demonstrations with the mother-child group. While at the same time, the project could conduct advocacy with government or private sector partners for input subsidies. In addition, the project could run a radio spot on the nutritional benefits of OFSP and then use the same audio in community discussion groups. So we're looking for this kind of layering and mutually reinforcing, strategically designed mix of approaches. So here, participation. Development practitioners across sectors have been emphasizing participation for years. It is just such a crucial best practice. But I think we could all admit that sometimes our implementation falls short of being truly participatory. We know that SBC is not about us. It's not just about delivering messages. So it's really about helping people and communities improve their lives. So to be empowering, our methods have to actively seek out and demonstrate respect for local perspectives and actively engage target groups throughout the SBC process. That means involving local people and analyzing the problems and planning solutions. It means implementing all activities using interactive methods that follow principles of adult learning. So a critical component of ensuring the effectiveness of SBC interventions is to test the core elements of your strategy and then adapt them based on your findings. A planned approach and tools you choose may reflect global evidence and expertise, but you don't really know what's going to be effective for the target group until you test those tools and activities with them in the context. So there are different kinds of testing. It could include concept testing, should include concept testing when you come up with the idea, key idea, not the messages or tools or activities themselves, but the concept or idea that they are founded on. Get feedback on those ideas from the target population to see what resonates or doesn't. And then we pre-test prototypes of specific communication materials, whether it be a poster or a radio spot. We pre-test tools for monitoring, job aids, and any activities, whether it's a recipe for a cooking demonstration or a youth drama facilitation guide, we test. Then we adapt elements based on our test results, and then we should field test the more developed versions to see how they actually work in practice for user friendliness. Piloting a whole intervention is another kind of testing that we do for learning and adaptation. The scope of and the methods for testing can be selected to fit a project's budget, but it really should never be neglected. This best practice, integrate with existing systems, relates to the socio-ecological model and addressing the different levels within that system. But here we're focusing on integration, which means the practice of designing a program to integrate with existing structures and systems and implementing in a way that really works through those local systems and builds on those existing structures. For example, this might mean embedding an initiative in an existing government program or mobilizing a network of volunteers that was established through a previous program. Such linkages are going to maximize the local ownership and sustainability of any intervention. Working through schools is another great way to integrate with systems that you might be experienced with. This best practice, it seems to me, might be the most foundational, crucial one of all, because without the capacity to design and deliver SBC activities effectively, implementers can't really expect to see a strong impact with intended behavior changes. Systems need to be built into the project's SBC strategy to ensure that people delivering the SBC activities have the necessary skills and knowledge and support to perform at a high quality standard. We look for training systems that are engaging and skills-based. We look for ongoing support systems that are tailored to frontline worker needs and provide coaching and mentoring that brings out the best in them. Part of this best practice is having systems to identify weaknesses and track improvement. So that relates to our next best practice. Here we're talking about systems to track implementation process and quality. But we go beyond just the standard monitoring. This best practice is very more than to just tracking output and outcome indicators. We recognize that while desired SBC outcomes, they might be fixed and may be determined by donors or other forces beyond the project, but the pathway to reaching those outcomes is not fixed and using like tried and tested approaches. We operate in dynamic landscapes that shift in relation to all kinds of factors, including demographic or sociocultural, economic, environmental variables. And think about, we work with multiple stakeholders with their own interests. We face limitations on our funding and capacity and logistics. So projects are going to need internal systems to account for all of this and to accept, to to have a system, to accept it, to work with it, and to learn from the experience in order to improve the quality of implementation and enhance our potential for success. Last slide on best practices is about evaluation. We know that program evaluations play a critical role in improving the quality and determining the effectiveness of SBC strategies and approaches that are needed to reach nutrition program outcomes. Evaluations link with the project's theory of change to identify gaps and successes. And when they're carefully designed and conducted, evaluations can help nutrition SBC programmers identify what worked well, what could have been done differently, and point the way for improved design and implementation as they apply learning and planning for future programs. I think that's the end of our quick run through of the best practices that we have identified based on that robust review that Amy described at the beginning. And I'm going to turn it back to you, Amy and Sedenia, to facilitate the next piece. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mary and Lynette, for providing the background and overview. I noticed a number of people came into the session during the kind of background portion and the discussion and clarification of those concepts and best practices. So if you all could please just introduce yourselves in the chat. We did have some really nice discussion while you guys were presenting. I'm just going to kind of highlight some of those quickly. There was some conversation, particularly from Catherine at Tanager, related to prioritization and how challenging that is. We all agree that sort of moving that less is more principle is a really hard one to push, especially when we're often pressured by donors to sort of boil the ocean with limited resources. So it is definitely a struggle. And one of the things we hope to do with this framework is develop out a paper and a guidance document that includes resources and case studies and examples of how this has been done in practice. And so we are in the process of compiling those examples and resources so that we can have something that will be usable for organizations and institutions. Another comment that was raised was really around this idea of engaging and prioritizing, how important that is as sort of that very, very first step, really working with communities to engage and really working with communities so that they are part of that prioritization process. This was mentioned by our colleagues from Alive and Thrive in West Africa. So Natalie, so we really appreciate you all providing us that feedback. What we would like to do now for about 3 minutes is if you had clarifying questions about them, or if you see gaps, have we missed a major best practice that you and your own institution have seen as critically important? Or have you seen other best practices that we might want to raise or bring to the forefront? Are there things that maybe we've missed or things that we can refine? We would love to have your feedback on that. You can either put this into the chat, or you can kind of unmute yourselves and let us know what you think. And I know a couple of folks, Yoti was saying that monitoring evaluation is quite challenging in SBC, systematic process of monitoring evaluation during the study period. We definitely agree on that. One of the things that we agree is extremely important, especially for social behavior change. And it falls both as a core principle for evidence-based and theory-informed, but also as a best practice in evaluation, is really mapping out that theory of change in terms of how you expect your activities to lead to changes in behavior, and sort of those incremental steps in behavior change that occur, so that you can then monitor those to understand potentially where breakdowns occurred or where successes occurred, because that allows us for that really rigorous learning to then build on and improve our social behavior change strategies. So then I think as well, pointing to Mary's comment about complexity, we all work, we're not doing randomized control trials with sort of a micronutrient supplement here. We're working in very complex systems-oriented fields. We have multiple moving parts. We're working across multiple sectors, and that type of evaluation requires a much more nuanced approach, like complexity analysis and some of those more complexity-informed approaches to M&E. So Lynette has shared some really great resources from our colleagues at Advancing Nutrition. So if you do have any additional clarification, questions, or thoughts, please do put them in the chat. What we're going to move to now is an activity where you all can sort of evaluate where you see the field, either from your own organization's perspective, or if you work with multiple organizations, where you feel those organizations are in terms of achieving these best practices and core principles. What we're going to ask you to do, we're not going to be doing this in the annotate function in Zoom. Claudia is going to open up a Jamboard for us, and she's going to provide the link to the Jamboard for everyone to look at. You're going to pull up the Jamboard, and then she is going to kind of provide us some instructions on how to use that. But essentially what you're going to do is rank your organization using either sticky notes or the text function or the drawing function, where you feel your organization falls in regards to that best practice or core principle. We'll go through a series of like 4 or 5 at a time. After we complete the first 4 or 5, I'm going to ask for folks to provide examples of their organization or examples that they have seen in practice of really good implementation of a best practice or core principle. So if we can all kind of move over to the Jamboard, that will allow us to begin seeing. So,
Right, great. Thank you for that, Amy. Should I start sharing my screen to show the Jamboard? Or...
Yes, please. I think it helps if it's shown, and then people can also, ideally everyone is at the Jamboard now. I'll monitor the chat to make sure if there's any problems, I can direct them. Yes.
Yeah, great. Wonderful. So I have just put in the chat a link to this. Everybody should have editing access. To complete the task, Amy will give you some more background on that once I'm done with this, but you can see here on the corner, we have pens where you can mark up these various different boxes. You can also add sticky notes. You can type your comment, leave it, save the comment, and then for instance, save it. And then you can move your stickies to different parts of the different parts of the slide. And we have 3 slides that we will be working through, and Amy will walk you through that. But if everybody could please click on the link in the chat below, then we can get started on the activity. And feel free to message me directly or to just message the general chat if you have technical difficulties, and I can assist you.
All right. So what I would like for everyone to do now is let's think about the core principles. Think about your own organization or other organizations you've worked with. To what extent do you believe your organization consistently applies each of the particular core principles, kind of as we've discussed them? And you can sort of rank where you feel your organization falls. And so if people can go ahead and do that, do sort of a self-assessment, because we're really interested to understand sort of what organizations feel they do well versus what they feel they could improve on. So take a few minutes to fill out that grid. And so this is great. We're seeing a pretty good kind of diversity across implementation of these. So though many people are we're seeing the bulk of it around that, about half to somewhat less than half the time that people see their organization or the organizations they work with following some of these core principles. I would love to hear an example, since we do have an organization that's talking about like they're always using community engaged participatory approaches. I think it would be great if we could all hear some examples of how that's being done. So if you are willing to share, please do let us know how your organization does community engagement and uses participatory approaches.
Hi, so my name is Gudrun. Unfortunately, because of traffic, I missed the whole kind of, background presentation. I hope I'm interpreting this correctly. So we do a lot of, we have a lot of group structures on the ground through which we implement. And usually during the planning stage, we do some sort of, but not systematic, formative research, but we do always engage with these folks. And we get their feedback on whatever we do, also continuously during the implementation. We have also the kind of peer level facilitated kind of sessions. So people are actually part of that. We have like an adapted care group approach integrated into agriculture, kind of farmer field schools, pastoralist field groups, and so on. And also continuously get feedback from them, would then apply that in like a next kind of version of our materials and so on, or methods. Our MNTE team is always very keen on like participatory kind of impact evaluation or monitoring, not evaluations, but monitoring. So yeah, I do think we really consider that throughout.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gudrun. Can you remind me again which organization you're with, just so we know?
It's called Welthungerhilfe, and I don't expect you to pronounce that. The show is WH8. And I think, Amy, we met a couple of years ago.
Yes.
Maybe I was with Concern back then. Yeah.
I think so. That's right.
Yeah.
So thank you. It's really exciting. Would you just provide a quick example of your participatory monitoring approach? I think that also speaks to one of the best practices that people were discussing earlier about the challenges of some of the M&E. What kind of strategies do you all use for participatory monitoring?
I think that's a question I can't really answer.
Gotcha.
I've participated in a training. I'm not sure if it's even like a real method. I try to Google it if like our thing is based on something that, I don't know, made it into the internet in a PDF version. It is a lot about like inviting actually representatives from the community into also attending like towards the end of this whole monitoring evaluation process into like big meetings. It's a lot of like self-ranking, using also like non-literary kind of like you don't have to write. So there's also a lot of like piling kind of, sticks and stones things, and yeah.
Awesome.
But I have no name to be approached.
It's okay. Oftentimes these activities don't necessarily have formal names.
They call it PIM, Participatory Impact Monitoring.
Excellent. Thank you. And then for some, I know it looks like theory informed seems to be one that we have no more than half the time. If someone could provide an example of when they've utilized theory to sort of help in the design and implementation. Okay, so if we have no takers on theory informed, then we can move on to the next slide for self-assessment. And we're moving into the best practices. Oh, it looks like some people have already done some of these as well. That's awesome. If you haven't done this, go ahead and rank yourself in terms of where you fit on these series of best practices. So identifying and prioritizing target behaviors, conducting formative research, targeting multiple levels of a system, using multiple reinforcing approaches, and using participant-focused participatory methods as part of sort of the SBC activity and engagement. And again, it looks like we have a pretty strong range with a little bit more folks doing most of the time for several of these, though we still have a number of organizations or projects that potentially are not always implementing these best practices consistently. I think that's really important to recognize as a way of, okay, so this is something that our organization can improve. For someone that has done the, for example, the targeting multiple levels of a system or even using multiple reinforcing approaches, if you could provide us some examples of that and how your group has done that in the past, that would be really awesome to hear. So no one willing to share. Well, if you want to, you can also go back into the chat and share your examples there, because it may just be easier to share in the chat than taking yourself off of mute. I understand that for sure. So then we will move on to the next self-assessment slide. And then if you've not already completed this one, you can go ahead and look at that as well to see sort of where our organizations fall in terms of consistently applying these best practices. Okay, so again, we're seeing a lot of kind of sometimes about half the time is where most people tend to be placing their organizations or the organizations that they work with or that they have examples from. So there's definitely, I think, some room for improvement for all of us. If anybody would like to provide some examples here, especially in terms of maybe integration, because we have some that are doing that all the time, or if folks could talk about how their organizations sort of build and maintain capacity of frontline workers. I think that's another really critical one that Mary highlighted as being perhaps one of our most important ones. It'd be great to hear some examples about how that's being done by organizations.
Yeah, maybe I could talk to the integration part.
Mm-hmm.
Our organization is more coming from the agriculture side. So we usually have agricultural structures in place, group structures and so on. Or we have a WASH program with like WASH clubs or something. So farmer field schools or WASH clubs, like there's a traditional kind of thing. And then nutrition, which is my kind of area, and which is more what I'm kind of speaking about here, or kind of what I have in mind, is usually then added onto that, and it's quite a new thing. So there was quite some reluctance in the organization to immediately jump into like, oh, let's just do nutrition programs and everything else is integrated into that. But it was always the other way around. We have something and integrate into that. I don't know, in case you were looking for the kind of like official kind of government structures, then I think we are, in some countries we do that, in others we wouldn't do that. So they wouldn't actually say all of the time, but it's usually within our existing program structures, always integrated. Maybe that's actually not what you meant.
No, it is. I think there's a number of different ways that we can see integration in terms of those existing systems and structures. And some organizations do work within existing nutrition programs. Some build those out, and then it invites others to then build into those systems. And some organizations, I think, especially in agriculture, have also worked with local schools and school systems to build out that as a key component of expanding diet diversity in ag. And then others have worked within specifically health facilities. So, for example, one of our projects in Kenya, we delivered OFSP vines actually through antenatal care, as opposed to through some of the more traditional farmer field schools and those approaches. We did have those demonstration gardens because it was part of the Ministry of Ag, but then we worked with the health systems and the health centers to incentivize women for uptake of ANC by providing vines through ANC services when they came for ANC. So it's sort of how we're building on a lot of these systems. So. And using those, because as Marion mentioned, I think it helps us reach a different audience and a different population, but it also helps build out ownership and sustainability. What about capacity of frontline workers? Do others have examples of maybe how they've worked on frontline worker capacity and really strengthening that and sustaining it?
Amy, I think there's also a comment in the chat regarding the capacity of frontline workers and the difficulty. I mean, there's training, but then some difficulty in maintaining capacity of frontline workers in terms of coaching and other forms of building capacity.
Thank you, Sidinia, for raising that. It was hard to kind of be going back and forth. I was able to comment on one person's question about clarifying that. And then, yeah, Catherine has also mentioned that the adapting and learning is often dependent on funding. And that's also very true of frontline workers as well. And sort of the ability we have to really support them is quite funding driven. So I think when organizations are able to kind of prioritize that, recognizing their importance. So as Claudia has just reminded us, we do need to wrap up in a few minutes, which is great because this was sort of our last slide here on our self-assessment. We can go back to the Zoom, and Sidinia, you can share slides again because we're actually wrapping up. So just some next steps and some ideas that we are having. Your feedback has been really helpful. The examples that you've provided, we may actually, with this in mind, reach out to some of you to provide some case studies that we can include, and of course, credit your organization and you for sharing those if those are something you're interested in doing to help contribute to this work. We are going to be refining this framework based on the feedback, definitely clarifying some things. And if you do want to contact us for more information, please feel free, or if you have case studies to share or materials that you would like for us to review and use, we can definitely do that. We are going to be sharing an abbreviated copy of this presentation by email so that you have it. And we're going to be providing an online survey that we will be sending to you to capture your feedback on the best practices. I know a lot of times we're in presentations, we think about things, we provide feedback, but then we leave the presentation, we go hear other presentations on best practices, like the one that's happening at 10 o'clock today. And it spawned, it spurs additional thinking and thoughts and ideas about recommendations. Probably towards the end of the week, we'll be sending out the presentation and that survey that we would love for you all to participate in and provide your feedback on, so that we can create a set of best practices and core concepts that really resonate with the community, that are really driven by the community. Ideally, this set of best practices will also be used to advocate with donors to enhance funding so that organizations can adequately achieve these best practices in a more consistent way. So if there's no other questions, I would like to thank our team for being here and presenting, and we would like to thank all of you. We can kind of leave the last 5 minutes or so back to you all for questions, for conversation, and or just give you back 5 minutes of your life, which is always appreciated. So thank you all very much, and we will stay on if others want to have some smaller conversation.
And a big thank you to you, Amy, for chairing the session, as well as all the presenters. But yes, big thanks again. And yeah, hope you all enjoy the rest of your day.